Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the AI Integrations Podcast for episode 9. We've got an exciting one for you today. Joining us is our first guest, and without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Spencer for introductions. So kick back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AI Integrations Podcast. I'm Spencer Thompson, the founder and CEO of AI Integrations, and today we've got with us Sandeep Kondury. Sandeep is a venture capitalist with Startup Haven as well as his own fund, the Lingo Fund, and he's most famous for his TEDx speech on lingo linguistics. So without further ado, Sandeep, you want to tell us a little bit about lingo linguistics and yourself, and let's talk about AI.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on, guys. Excited to be a guest. So, my background is I'm a venture capitalist. I have invested in over 20 companies, deployed over $20 million, and interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of startups over the years. And this experience has given me the ability to develop my own thesis on what it takes to be one of the any successful startup. And I believe for any startup to be successful, it's not the funding that matters. It's not the technology that matters. It's the language associated with the company itself. And excited to be a part of this conversation and share more of my thoughts.
Yeah. Do you kind of want to elaborate on what you mean by the language around a startup?
Yeah, yeah. So a little background about this idea is a couple of years ago, I was a founder. I was trying to start my own AI company. We were building this SaaS product for sales guys to take notes during their sales meetings. And we were so excited about this product. We were thinking we are going to change the sales industry, B2B online sales industry. And couple months we were struggling. We were trying to get our first few customers, and we weren't getting a lot of traction, and it got me really frustrated. And I was talking to my co-founder one day in a casual random chat evening, dinner chat, and he mentions, hey, did you hear about this new term called AI agents? And I'm like, what is that? I've never heard that. That was the first time I ever heard that word. So I got very intrigued, and he explains it's an AI new technology that's coming out that will essentially replace salespeople, thereby building what making what we're building kind of irrelevant. So I sort of didn't agree with him. I didn't believe this is gonna make any real impact in the business world. And what would you guess? In 6 months, AI agents sort of became what everyone was talking about. Uh, Companies like Nvidia were openly promoting this idea, and the entire industry just shifted overnight, it felt like. And it blew my mind, the power of what a new idea, new vocabulary can have on society and on startup culture. And that experience kind of solidified my assumption, my hypothesis that markets move where language moves. So it's to say that when you create something revolutionary, imagine Google when you were in the early 2000s, or uh, Uber in the early 2000s, Facebook. These all these technologies sort of came out, and they almost created an entire new market. You can call it blue ocean strategy. You can call it first mover advantage. But essentially, they've created a new behavior in either consumer behavior or how businesses operate, and sort of owned a certain language, a certain lingo around themselves. So I think most people sort of resonate with the social media example. I've certainly experienced this myself. Is when I was in college, and right when Facebook was getting to its charm, everyone wanted to build a social media business, but they were late. They were already late. Social media was, as a category, owned by uh, Facebook and any other new startups that started coming into this space. Facebook sort of went out aggressively, started buying everything, Instagram, WhatsApp. They wanted to monopolize this idea of what social media is. And I think this you can see this sort of behavior across industries is when you create something that's original and new, you sort of have the ability to name and frame what it is and use that as leverage for other people to refer back to you every time they want to talk about it, which is very, very, it's a good word of mouth. It's a way to market yourself even when you're not sitting in a specific room.
Yeah. So, like, with Uber, for example, rather than saying, I'm going to hail a ride share, everyone just says, oh, I'll Uber. Or with, search engines, people don't say, I'm going to use a search engine. It's, I'm going to Google that. And so I think that's kind of to your point, right? Is that the product and their lingo became synonymous with the service and the desired outcome, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. There's two distinct ways in which naming, in my observation, works. Is a lot of people in the venture capital industry as well sort of understand how certain brand names get associated with a certain action or certain technology. Google is a great example. A lot of times talk to people, they bring up Kleenex and they're like, "Oh, is that what you're talking about?" Yes, of course, but I think it goes much more deeper to the second type is when you're sort of naming a certain behavior. And I talked about this in my TEDx speech. Is HubSpot sort of owned the concept of inbound marketing. And inbound marketing, if you really look at it, it's as a behavior, it probably existed for as long as business existed, uh, providing value to your customers, free value through your customers through information. But HubSpot was able to really take a unique position doing this by leveraging their technology and positioning themselves as the leaders of being able to perform this action. So, branding is one aspect of it. And the second aspect is probably when you're able to name a certain action, a certain behavior, and form a movement, form a cluster of people who all speak the same language, who are excited about this new thing you're building. And it needs to be original enough so that you don't get into a competitive space where there's other incumbents who can crush you easily. Uh, so it needs a little bit of a novelty attached to it, and also being able to move fast and move first.
Yeah, so that's going to segue nicely. What do you think about all the lingo going on with AI right now and the companies around there? And how do you kind of see your thesis playing out right now in the current AI realm?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a very interesting time for me personally for testing my thesis. I need to start by saying the words people use can predict startup success, but also bubbles. At the end of the day, growth, economy, all of these things are sort of like a collective narrative we hold ourselves together with. So anytime there's new technology or a new industry being formed, whether it's a few centuries ago or a few decades ago in the industrial revolution, or today in the AI revolution, there's a lot of new exciting technology and a lot of new behaviors and a lot of new actions that are possible that were not previously possible that's being available and they're getting generated. But it also comes with a risk of over leveraging a certain market or a certain industry. And that's what most economists mostly fear is hype cycles, getting excited about a certain new shiny thing and investing all your eggs in that basket, and that sort of leading to a very uh, unimaginable, sort of unflavorful sort of result.
Yeah. So then, off of that, what do you see as the current? I know you're kind of dancing around it, but I'll go ahead and say it, the bubble effect right now. Do you think we're in a bubble regarding the overhypeness of AI? I mean, one thing you and I've talked about, off the air before this podcast, is that without the growth of the Mag Seven and adjusted for inflation, the S&P 500 is essentially neutral this year. So do you think that this is justified? Do you think that we're over leveraged in this? I'm curious what your thoughts on kind of our current state of the AI hype and AI bubble are.
Yeah, this itself will probably take the rest of the podcast to describe. We're really at like an inflection point right now, right? What's happening in the world with the changing world order, if you want to call it that, trade wars, uncertainty in the markets, AI revolution, migration crisis, global climate crisis, so on and so forth. There's so many things happening at the same time. It's really an inflection point. And specifically to talk about what's happening in the AI sort of public markets with the Max 7, as you call it, is there's been a very, very heavy sort of focus on this market. As we all know, uh, S&P 500, I got to tell you this. I was just reading a paper the other day. We all know over a long enough period of time, it gives sort of a conservative 10 to 12% returns in the long term. But if you look at it from an year to year basis, S&P 500 sometimes even performs negatively. So it's not that every year it's producing 10% year over year. There's the 10% is only if you look at it in the long term, right? So there are many years in between where it performs negatively as well. So that is obviously not a golden bullet. It's not something you can invest in and next year you're going to make 10%. It's not a promise. Uh, what's happening specifically to the Max 7, the all the companies that are leveraging AI, is there's a lot of excitement because there's political alignment. There's an AI arms race going on with China. So everyone wants AI to sort of take off and America to be the leader in this new revolution, uh, which comes with a lot of risk, right? Investment is always something that goes along with risk. So there's a lot of promise around new technologies, new applications coming with the AI wave, which for some parts we can see the result. There's really amazing technology being built by some of these big firms. But again, does it translate to growth? Like, and clearly not, right? Like at this point, I think the P&E ratio for uh, OpenAI and NVIDIA is like over 23 times. I'm definitely sure it's over 30
Yeah.
times of what their PNE is, which is conventionally not considered a very good investment. It's high risk. So stuff like that is not something that is would have would have been acceptable in a normal time period. But today, because we're in this sense of urgency and there's an inflection point, everyone seems to be, or at least the public markets seem to be okay with taking that kind of risk.
Yeah. So how do you think that plays out on a macro scale? I know you mentioned the essential like technological arms race and how I don't think we've seen anything like this personally since like the 1960s and 70s with the race to the moon and the space race in Russia and all that stuff. So do you think that the US economy as a whole has such a vested interest in this that it's going to kind of be almost too big to fail in a bubble sense with like the Mag 7 and some of these really big companies?
Yeah, yeah, that takes a more deliberate sort of research and understanding in the macro sense, right? As you mentioned, there's always in our civilization currently, there's always a few entities that we deem are too big to fail. So we
Yeah.
were talking about this before the podcast. Companies like Microsoft, if they decide to, they're obviously not going. That's not going to happen. But if for some reason Microsoft decides they're going to shut door, that's going to collapse our civilization because they're so deeply integrated into everything we do, and they're really really essential for our economy to function as it is today. Our flights depend on it, our governments depend on it, our entire infrastructure, the electrical grid, everything probably depends on it. uh, when it comes to the Max 7, they're getting there. right? Like OpenAI is a relatively new company. They want to be something that becomes entrenched into our society. They're building this really amazing new technology, so they're just getting started becoming an enterprise sort of uh, monarch, if you if you want to use that word. The like a very big empire that really connects a lot of these nodes of like enterprises, governments, small markets, private markets, public markets, all of those together. So I think in the AI bubble, if you want to use that word right now, uh, I'm less worried about the Max 7. If for some reason they don't reach their goals or there's something that happens, I don't think they've reached the status of too big to fail today as we speak. That might change very, very soon too. Things are moving extremely quickly, but it does leave a huge sort of risk in the hands of many, many, many investors. And just to branch out a little bit, I fear more about the private markets than in the public markets. I talked about this too earlier. I think I'm a firm believer that public markets are hyper efficient. They're always heavily, heavily scrutinized and monetized. There's so many billions of eyes on it. I personally believe if there's ever any inefficiency in a public market, there's going to be someone who is going to scrape the delta. Like they're going to be very smart people who are constantly monitoring public markets, and they're going to find something they can scrape off. So they're very efficient. But what happens in the public markets, the private markets, is you have a bunch of these smart guys building on a specific strategy, whether it's a hedge fund or venture capital or some other sort of alternate investment. And when these guys grow big enough to the point where they might be too big to fail, that becomes a much bigger, higher risk because they go unnoticed. They're obviously regulated. The governments are monitoring them, but they're not as heavily scrutinized as the public markets. So that's where I think risk sort of ends up brewing and bubbling up to the point where it might get to a point where it's too late. This was the case in the 2000s during the housing market crash, and the dot-com bubble was through the venture capital. And as far as I can tell, when a too big to fail market, what that means is there's so many other economies or markets that are tied up to this one entity. One market goes down, it sort of has a ripple effect across the board and brings down the rest of the economy, which is a much higher risk in my opinion.
So am I correct in saying then you're more worried about like an A16Z getting over leveraged on these AI startups more than you are worried about Nvidia and Microsoft over leveraging with kind of what they're doing, shifting money around in the big Mac 7 level?
Yeah, I would not use a firm specifically like A16Z. They're very reputed. They're obviously going to be, and you bring up a great point, they're going to be risk adjusted. Companies like A16Z or any other venture capital firm that's reputed enough, they're going to be risk adjusted investments, right? So when they're making investments into startups, they know they work with the assumption that a huge portion of these startups are going to fail. They know that, and they work that math into their models. Uh, in the current situation, maybe that they might have over leveraged. Some certain firms might have over leveraged AI, but it probably won't make them go under. They would have worked out the math for sure. I'm confident about that. Uh, but what happens? What I'm more worried about is unadjusted risk, right? So I recently read about a very popular trading company getting access to democratizing venture capital. On the face of it, it looks like a wonderful thing. It's like, oh yeah, like venture capital needs to be accessible to everyone. um, I agree with the principle, but when it comes to practice, venture capital or most other alternate investments are very high risk, and there needs to be a certain education uh, that needs to happen before retail investors invest in those asset classes. And if they do it without the education, more likely than not, they're going to burn their hands, and they're going to make risky decisions, and it's going to end up costing a lot of people a lot of money. So just to summarize, I would say any private investors too that are adjusting their risk when they're investing, looking at a grander picture, looking at what's happening across the board, and making decisions based on that, rather than unadjusted risk where they're just bullish on something because they know the market is in a hype cycle and they're just going to keep investing no matter what until the until the bubble pops. That's never a good behavior.
Yeah. So off of that and like being kind of speculative in the future, do you think the market's kind of adjusting for future innovation? Like, I think one thing that's really cool that's going to come in the next few years, we've talked about in the podcast a few times, is like AI personal hardware, right? Like the smartphone industry is, I don't have numbers, but massive amounts of money is generated by the smartphone industry. So if that changes into an AI compute device, obviously that's going to kind of help grow this whole AI business, AI sector. So do you think the reason why companies are relatively leveraged and relatively high, prop PE ratios, things of that nature, is kind of this future speculation of, well, the hardware can come out that, threatens the smartphone. What about like robo-taxi threatening Uber? What about Optimus allowing businesses to be more efficient for industrial? You think we're kind of factoring a lot of that in as a market as a whole, and that's kind of playing into why it's inflated right now?
Absolutely, you're right. I think investors, even through my personal investing lens, I hear a lot of exciting things happening every day, and I want to be a part of that. I want to contribute. I want to invest. I want to help all these new innovations happening. And I think as a collective society, we're all hyped about what's coming, and we all want to invest in that. Uh, and it comes at a and that's what we're all hoping for sure. We want to see these new technologies come out of just certain pockets and be applied across the board, and that's raising the excitement overall, sort of further increasing the hype around everything that's happening. I think there's two ways I look at this. First is that there's more excitement about new technologies and there's more hype and people are investing more, over leveraging, increasing the increasing the overall risk of the assets. On the other hand, we want to be able to do this, right? Like we understand the risk, but also we want AI uh, to have more applications. We want companies like AI integrations to build new technologies and sort of democratize. I don't like using the word, but democratize this new foundational technology that's on the magnitude of uh, like the the industrial revolution, and sort of change the world, fundamentally change the world. And that cannot just happen if one company works on it. If OpenAI just builds chatbots, that's probably not going to happen. We need hundreds and thousands of entrepreneurs applying uh, this new technology into various industries and various sectors. And I think that's a way we can reduce the risk too. So the moment there's a lot of startups starting to build all of these things, the risk is bound to get diversified. And that's much better than just hyper focusing on just like five startups or five companies that are taking all the money in the world and sort of becoming more and more riskier. And I'm pretty sure all the Max 7 are hoping there's going to be thousands of founders building a lot of new applications using their technology.
Yeah, I will say I've noticed. So I've been working using OpenAI's products for a little over 3 years now. And I've noticed that specifically in the past year, they've put a lot of attention into helping founders build on top of their foundational models. And that's been really cool to see what that's allowed. let me ask you. So, if OpenAI isn't necessarily too big to fail yet, are all foundational models too big to fail, right? Because if OpenAI goes out tomorrow, if Sam Altman cut the mythical switch and said no more Chat GPT, that would not be great. But like, there's Anthropic, there's Google, there's Meta, there's a bunch of Grok, there's a bunch of other models out there. So while one on its own might not be too big to fail, do you think foundational AI LLMs in their current state are too big to fail? Do you think the world would just go crazy if tomorrow they all flick the switch simultaneously?
Yeah, this is purely hypothetical, right? And it's a point of speculation, whether they're too big at this point. Have they integrated our entire market? Have they have they been integrated into our entire market to the point where we stop using it? Is it going to shut businesses or fail entire markets? I would imagine not. My gut feeling is not. I would have to dive deeper into this, understand the applications of LLMs across the board, across different markets and industries and businesses. Um, my understanding is right now, sort of the LLM sort of impact has been concentrated in a few industries, like the engineering industry, the consulting business, and a few other service-based businesses that highly leverage this technology. But has it been integrated into our military, our governments, or public markets is something I'm not completely aware of. I'll need to have a deeper look. And the moment I look at this, and I can tell you, the moment we know there's like an LLM helping world governments or the UN, then of course we're gonna have to say, you know what, like, yeah, we cannot switch this off. This needs to be running.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, there was just like a small talking about this. This reminded me. I think this was in Europe or Eastern Asia somewhere. There was a country that just created an AI minister. They have an AI minister for something.
Yep.
So obviously, if these language models are switched off, that ministry is gonna get into trouble. So that's what I mean.
Yeah, that's super interesting to think about. I'm just going to throw some facts stats I found while I was doing some research for this podcast, actually, and kind of get your thoughts. OpenAI will have to spend $1 trillion between now and 2030 if they continue growing at the rate they have. And that $1 trillion would solely be on the infrastructure, the compute, the data centers. What's kind of your reaction to that statistic, and what are your thoughts on that?
Wild, right? That is pretty wild. I think a couple of years ago, being $1 trillion company was like a crazy thing. I was like, wow, that's the greatest achievement. But now that you're talking about $1 trillion of expense, that's just bonkers to me.
Which brings up my second question on the matter. Will OpenAI be $1 trillion company by the end of the decade? Pure speculation. I get, there's a lot between now and then, but what do you think?
That's a hard one. I mean, I think the best sort of judgment for that would just be if they were a public company. We would know immediately. But since they're not, I cannot guess.
Fair enough. A thing that's been going around these highly leveraged industries, which I think is interesting, right? Because there's a lot of elements to AI that people are starting to catch on to. Like there's the data element. Scale AI was, I think, Meta's largest acquisition ever. And that was in large part a data play. That's something a lot of people don't know. There's also this compute element. And a saying that's been going around the engineering industry, at least, is 10x your compute, 100x your efficiency. So how do you think that is data centers really going to be the new digital gold and like the new fuel that runs our economy? How do you think about all these massive scale data centers where Elon's buying 100,000 GPUs from NVIDIA and things of that nature?
Yeah, I think it's very nuanced, right? Like going back to my lingo thesis, whenever a certain markets are a certain market is becomes part of the conversation, it's somebody's benefiting from it. Someone's making a profit by just us talking about it. But when it comes to the ROI on that investment for any other business that's using their technology, uh, it works on a case by case basis. You'll have to look at what you're building, why you need the compute. That does that compute have the ability to give you the return that you're hoping for? It makes sense just by thinking about it. It makes sense for SpaceX to have this sort of compute because their mission is to go to the Mars. So of course, like they're gonna make their money back on a few billion dollars of GPUs. Uh, but if you're uh, like a let's say like some other company that's building like advertising for something, right? Maybe not. That's probably hard to justify.
Yeah, so these massive data centers need a path to massive ROI. It can't just be building them for the sake of building them, is kind of what you're saying.
Exactly.
Cool. I don't want to run too far over, but one thing I kind of, my 2 cents, and this is super high level, but we have a lot of the smartest people in the world right now, I would argue, going all in on AI. That's part of what gives me confidence in kind of the long term of it. So we've got, ARK Investments, A16Z, Y Combinator, Tesla, OpenAI, Google, Meta, AMD, NVIDIA. All of these companies are, if they probably have 80% of their chips on the AI table right now, so to speak. And I think all those companies are run by incredibly smart people. And actually, I'll just share a quote I wanted to share from Jamie Dimon. I think he was asked last week about kind of the AI economy. Jamie Dimon's the CEO of Chase. He said, cars as a whole paid off in the long run. TV as a whole paid off in the long run. Internet as a whole paid off in the long run. I think the same thing is going to happen with AI. Yes, there's going to be some big winners. Yes, there's going to be some big losers. But as a whole, in the long run, this will create more value than it loses. What are your thoughts on that as kind of an ending, like the 3-year, 5-year, 10-year time frame?
That makes a lot of sense, right? It's going back to the history is the best way you can understand what's currently happening. And it couldn't have been said better, I think, is right now we're very focused on the present moment where we sort of forget to learn from what's happened in the past. And that sort of sentence exactly describes what we should be expecting and really making our judgments based off of.
Awesome. I tend to agree. I think we're in for a potentially, bumpy year or two, but, give this 3 to 5 to 10 years to play out. And I do think that as a whole, AI will be a massive net positive for our economy, especially when you consider how invested we are on a macro and a micro scale with AI as a society. I believe that's only going to grow. I mean, keep in mind, if we had this conversation 3 years ago, this thought would be foreign. Like, no way. And, the progress we've had in the past 3 years in this direction, if we do that for another 3 years, I think a lot of these things would be too big to fail. And I think a lot of, OpenAI, in my opinion, I'll go ahead and speculate. I do believe OpenAI will be $1 trillion company by the end of the decade, for example. But that's kind of wrapping up some thoughts from me. Sandeep, thanks for being with us. Do you have anything else you want to share with the AI Integrations viewers and podcast?
Yeah, just keep following the podcast. Follow me. If you find me on LinkedIn, hit me a message. And thank you so much, guys, for having me on. This was very exciting.
Yeah, thanks for being on. We appreciate you.
Absolutely wonderful to have you. Everybody, remember, you can find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and X. Sandeep is also available. You can find him on LinkedIn. Where else where can people find you specifically?
On X as well, X and LinkedIn.
Perfect.
Cool.
So yeah, look up Sandeep, give him a follow as well. Thank you for joining us. And we will be back next week, I believe, with another guest. So we'll have more on that soon. Thank you for your time, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, one last thing. We'll make sure to link Sandeep's socials as well as his TED Talk in the description of this podcast, as well as our own socials as well. Stay tuned on the AI Integrations podcast.
Thank you, everybody.
Cool.